Thank you all for coming out. It's been a great day of lots of discussions, lots of conversations. But to finally wrap up our great day for this event, Faces of the Industry, it's my pleasure to invite Captain Eric Poole. He is a 1990 UND alum. Last week, he was inducted to our UND Aerospace Hall of Fame. He's a mentor, he's a leader, and he's a role model. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Eric Poole. You wanted me to play this song for him, by the way.
This is my walk-up music, folks. It wasn't supposed to stop. So anybody recognize this song? And yeah, old guys do, right? So some of you youngsters, I know TikTok is the medium that gets things refreshed again. I started hearing Kate Bush songs that are all of a sudden popular that was back in the 80s. So yeah, I told Jordan I wanted some walk-up music, and the name of this song is called Trouble Man, right? And it says, I come up hard, which is the song, excuse me, thank you. Song is something I really do identify with in the way where, as we'll kind of navigate my life a little bit as part of the conversation today, that, yeah, I came through a really unique and a different course to my existence as a human being and as a professional as well. So are they both on? This two mic thing is throwing me off a little bit. All right. So, but I wanted to start today's conversation with an acknowledgement. So bear with me. I'm just going to read through this a little bit because I think it's important enough, and I jotted these notes down last night just to make sure that I shared this with everyone. So thank you to the student organization of Women in Aviation, OBAP, Latin Pilots Association, National Gay Pilots Association, and Professional Asian Pilots Association for this invitation today. I'm truly honored and humbled to be asked to deliver the keynote. I'm a proud graduate of UND Aerospace, class of 1990, and the first African-American flight instructor here. And it's clearly apparent to me that we've taken some meaningful steps in diversity since my time here as a student and as an instructor. I lost my place for a second, hold on. There we go. I don't read very well. But as I walked through the halls of Odegaard and Clifford a couple weeks ago when I was here, it was readily apparent that we still had significant work to do on the diversity front. As the preeminent aviation education institution, the work we are doing at these organizations is invaluable. These organizations sprout out of need for community and fellowship. They'll look inward to support the members of the respective organization while providing collective voice to the challenges of our industries to be more inclusive and put forth a deliberate effort to provide access and opportunity and acceptance to those groups who have historically been excluded. As organizations and as individuals, we offer value and worth to the industry that seems at times woefully out of step. All you have to do is to look at the current makeup of the industry's pilot group, as well as those who have been appointed in the industry leadership positions. Depending on the survey, approximately 93 to 95% of pilots are men, 88 to 92% are of European ancestry. These statistics underscore the failure of our industry to keep pace with the changing demographics of our country. As these statistics give the perception of exclusion, it is only recently that the industry is making a concerted effort to address the lack of diversity in the pilot ranks, not because of any altruistic motives, but because not having enough pilots is bad for business. United's Aviate program has boldly stated statistical goals of diversity for its program. Some of our JetBlue's Gateway programs are part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. American Airlines recently donated $1.5 million to the OBAP Luke Weathers Flight Academy. All these initiatives are welcome and needed, and as we continue as an industry on a path of inclusion, this makes the combined work you do on campus all that more significant. With certainty, you will have a positive downline impact on the industry, and more importantly, a positive impact on the lives of people who often feel isolated and uncomfortably conspicuous. We must continue to nurture and contribute to these organizations, as these organizations are the giving tree. Giving Tree. When my kids were very young, I used to read them this book called The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. The story is about a little boy and a tree that loved him. The boy grows up, and the tree provides all needful things to the boy: shade on a hot day, branches to frolic and swing, from fruit as sustenance and wood materials to build. Eventually, the boy took from the tree all the usefulness, and there wasn't a thing more that the tree could provide the boy other than be a stump in his elder age. But unlike the story, hang on one second, I'm sorry. Can't even read my own notes. But unlike the story, the boy would take from the tree, and there would be nothing more the tree could give. We must nurture and feed and grow the tree by giving back the organization, as the tree must continue to give others what they need. So keep up the great work in finding ways to work together and highlight the common goals, support each other's efforts, and stay true to the mission of your organization, and leave your organization better than you found it, which will leave the industry better than it is. So thank you, everyone, for your great work that you're doing. So the next part is I just want to kind of share with my personal experience and my life in general, and how I became a chief pilot here at JetBlue Airways. In the back, you'll see kind of this photo collage of who I am and where I've been. So my early life journey kind of looks like this. The reason I exist as a human being is the worst form of geopolitics that exists on Earth. All right? I'm a product of war. And what that means is, as a result of war, the two nations that were fighting a war against their enemies decided that it would be a good idea to persuade young, poor Korean women into prostitution. So my mother was a prostitute, and my father was a military soldier in a place where we call Uijeongbu, which is just north of Seoul and just south of the demilitarized zone in Korea. The geopolitics of this whole time was very like anachronism today, but back then it was just kind of how life was. The ravage war, the daughters of the poor people who have been ravaged by war ended up walking the street and kind of supporting the soldiers with the complicity of the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army would take these prostitutes and make sure that they were healthy, and they would be granted these cards that they would be able to present to the soldiers as a bill of health. So the village that I was born in, essentially there's some pictures back there, essentially was a very humble village. There was a common water well, an outhouse. That's actually a picture of it today. And when we were kids, we lived just outside the military barracks, our military installation, and most of the kids were kind of my complexion, not full Korean. Most of the fathers of the children were black. Most of the mothers were Korean prostitutes. So that is the route in which where I kind of came up, right? So when Marvin Gaye talks about coming up hard, that resonated with me, and that's why that song is so significant. So as a mixed race Black Korean kid, you live in a patriarchal society where a father's lineage is the most important part of your humanity, right? So for kids like me, there were no opportunities to get an education because you weren't allowed in the public schools. From the mind of the Korean government, kids of mixed heritage essentially was a problem for the Americans because they're the ones who sired these children, right? So the future was pretty bleak. I was very young. I had no idea what the world around me was. The perception of America at that point was, I thought Americans were Black. So I ended up going to an orphanage, and every now and again they would do these kind of police sweeps of kids who were homeless, and they would take them and then institutionalize them. My mother passed away when I was about 4 years old, so I was just kind of living in the village amongst the villagers, and whoever was there would just kind of take me in and take custody of me. So in one of these sweeps, they came in. Unfortunately, the questions that were asked found out that I didn't have parents, so I ended up becoming institutionalized and actually went to a pretty decent orphanage. It was an American-run orphanage by the name of Holt International. It was part of the Lutheran Social Services, thus the link to Minnesota that you'll find out. So I went in there, and these are pictures of me in the orphanage, and one of the very significant people that in my life I've just kind of leaned on to better understand my existence, life in general kind of thing. So as I was an orphan in the orphanage, most of the children in the orphanage were mixed race, most of them of African American and Korean heritage. Because if a kid was a mixed race, white and Korean, they wouldn't stay in the orphanage very long. They'd either get placed in homes in either Europe, Australia, or the United States. So it was about 2.5 years I was in the orphanage. I ended up getting adopted to a family in Minneapolis. It was a kind of a wonderful occasion, right? So, and I'm thinking I'm going to America, I'm going home, I'm going to suburban Minnesota, and I show up at school, and I'm one of maybe 3 Black kids in the whole school. So my whole perspective on America slowly began to change, where I felt like an outsider, and then I was hoping that I'd come here and be an insider, and once again, it was an outsider, right? So as wonderful as Minnesotans are, I think sometimes we don't really take stock of other people's experiences. So as I was growing up, it was difficult in the way that I had to adjust culturally as well as being overly conspicuous. I'd have these 20-inch afros that I ended up growing, and it became kind of the fun piece where I remember in elementary school, kids would just stick pencils in my hair for fun, and at one point there was like 27 pencils in my hair and you couldn't see any of them. And so that was kind of my link into my childhood in Minnesota. The problem with the first family, because I came to them with so much life experience that wasn't necessarily positive, and they were kind of an older couple, really rooted in their religion, and they felt like maybe these situations and maybe my anger issues and my struggles through elementary school could be dealt through religion. So I was sent away to church camps, like Jesus was kind of the answer for all that ailed me kind of perspective. And it was a struggle, and all the all the challenges that I had to deal with was dealt in a punitive way instead of a loving and nurturing way. And everybody at school kind of knew that I was struggling through life in that way. And the amazing thing was the school's administrators were really, really supportive. They were supportive in the way that anytime I would come to school, there was a couple teachers who would always recognize the fact that I would have struggles at home, kind of take me aside, have a conversation, and ultimately, they ended up creating a different support network in the schools. So because of my struggles with my adoptive family, I ended up kind of couch surfing at friends' places throughout middle school until I got to high school. And I finally took one of my foster family that was kind of taking custody of me in high school and moved in with them. And there I found out what kind of a nurturing environment was. And I think one of the important things that I realized is that I went from a somewhat affluent family to a very working class white family. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the things that I needed. It was the love that I needed. And they were so gracious with their love and their patience and the fact that I came here with some of the life experiences that impacted me as a young teenager, right? It's hard enough being a teenager, and if you had to kind of go through life with other challenges that really kind of molded you into a way can be misdiagnosed or misinterpreted as being violent or as being incorrigible, those kind of things. And so the environment was so critical in me kind of turning my perspective around just about me as a human being, as well as just the outlook in life. So the one thing I found out that I excelled at fairly early in life or two things. I was pretty good at academics. The other thing was I was really good at sports, right? Sports became kind of my vessel into kind of self-worth, right? It was fourth grade. There was an all-school track and field meet. So I was one of these kids who at recess kind of kept to themselves for the most part. Didn't interact too much with too many kids. Maybe a couple other kind of outsider kids would hang out and just kind of sit in the corner while other kids played until the track and field meet. I ended up winning all the races that I entered, and so now you're thinking about like looking at young boys at that age. All of a sudden you have athletic ability. Now they want you to play in their reindeer game, so to speak, right? So now I'm invited to play football, basketball. So I realized that this was kind of one of these, a way for me to be relevant in my schools and in my existence. And my circle of friends became broader and broader. So as I played high school football, I was good enough to get courted scholarships for football. So obviously I ended up here at UND to play football. I looked at the school down south at NDSU, and I didn't come here because of the aviation because of the aviation program. I just came here because I knew that at the end of the day, I wanted an education, which meant maybe a lease on my adult life kind of thing. So, but how I discovered aviation was, well, one, it's kind of ubiquitous when you come to UND, right? You can't get away from it. Guys always tell you that they're an aviation major, and back in those days, the pilots would carry around these briefcases that would have Jeppesen charts, headsets, and everything else. So in my sophomore year, I had a roommate. His name is Eric Hall. He's currently a captain at Delta. He was so instrumental in kind of introducing me to aviation, right? And so the fall of my sophomore year, I made the mistake of taking organic chemistry and microbiology because I was a biology major. I wasn't really having fun with school, on top of the fact that I had my commitments with athletics. So it was really a difficult fall for me, not much fun. Didn't do much socializing and just kind of focusing on school. And one day, Eric said, hey, I'm doing this cross country. Like, do you want to go with? I'm like, what's a cross country and go with where? He said, oh, we're doing the Devil's Triangle. I'm like, that doesn't seem inviting, right? So I don't know, you guys still do the Devil's Triangle, Devil's Lake, Fargo, and back up to Grand Forks? So I spent the whole day just flying to Devil's Lake, and I just sat up there just the whole time, just marveling, looking down, thinking, so this is your major? Like, how is this your major? Like, what are you gonna do with this? And it just didn't dawn on me that aviation career was a reality, right? And so he started talking about how he's gonna be an airline pilot, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And I'm thinking through this whole process, and I'm thinking, man, this seems like it's gonna be way more fun than, biology, organic chemistry. So we came back down, and I genuinely just wanted to kind of have him talk through his whole kind of education piece. And he was about a year and a half ahead of me in the program. So he goes, so I got my private, and he just kind of step by step kind of told me what I needed to do if I wanted to do this. And I said, so then I went back over to the football coach and said, hey, I'm thinking about changing my major. And then he kind of had this stop the conversation. And he says, well, your scholarship doesn't cover the cost of aviation. And I'm like, huh, is it expensive? He goes, well, maybe you should go do some research and find out. So then I go run back to Eric. It's like, hey, so my scholarship doesn't cover this. What do we do? He goes, oh, yeah. So you can go get loans and you can get some grants. So again, now he's become my financial advisor. So he and I run down to the bursar's office and found out second semester I was eligible for a Pell Grant because if I declared aviation as a major, it's all factored into the part of the fees part of it, right? And so I ended up getting a Pell Grant, got my private pilot's license. At the time, it was only $2,500 to get your, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm old, that's all that says. So $2,500, my Pell Grant covered it, and off I go, right? Got my private pilot's rating. I stayed here for the summer, worked on my instrument, and I was one of these guys in the Aviation 100 class. Like, I didn't even know what an aileron was. And there were guys who were just talking aviation jargon, and I just sit in the back and just go, oh, maybe I made a mistake, right? I felt like I was so far behind the power curve on my knowledge of aviation. And I go back to Eric. I'm like, dude, I don't know if this is right for me because I'm feeling like my knowledge base is so, he goes, don't worry about those. Like, I'll help you through this. And through the course of my, I guess it was 3 years left of my college career, he was kind of my mentor. And like you said, you were talking about networking, not just vertically, horizontally. And my thing is, mentoring horizontally also is a really effective way, right? So I wouldn't be an aviator without Eric Hall just because he was my roommate and really opened himself and availed himself to be a mentor for me. So I graduate, and I'm still trying to figure out, okay, so Eric Hall's flight instructing. He goes, yeah, you got to go get your CFI. I'm like, oh, okay, so how do I do that? I got a degree in aeronautical studies and space sciences at the time, and no way to make money unless I get my CFI. So fortunately, I just recently bought this Mazda RX-7 that somebody rear-ended. And so I got money for insurance for that car, which got totaled. So rather than fix the car, I used the money to go get my CFI and double I. So it was one of those, serendipitous kind of accidents. And I drove, like, as a flight instructor with this beat-up Mazda RX-7 with the back end smashed, and I would just say, that paid for my CFI, right? So got a job as a flight instructor. In those days, I think when they interviewed candidates for flight instructor at that time, there were like 110 candidates for like 6 jobs, because this was in the spring semester. So the one thing that I had going for me was then chief flight instructor, his name is Don Dubuque, was a huge softball guy. And he knew I was a jock. So he said, okay, so he tells me that you got to pass the interview and do all that stuff, but your inside track is that I need a shortstop for my softball team. Like, it's a beer-drinking softball team, but he is so serious about his softball, right? And we just kind of laughed about it. So as I got through, Eric was one of the supervisors. He said he was in meeting rooms just really kind of advocating for me in terms of why the college needed somebody like me. We could attract other athletes, be good to have some diversity around here, kind of thing. And so I ended up getting this really a rare opportunity to be a flight instructor a semester after I graduated from UND. So I did that for a couple of years. Now, mind you, this is pre-RJ boom, so regional jobs were really hard to come by. There was a point where I think UND instructors were getting hired at an airline called Great Lakes for, I think it was like 13 cents a mile they would pay. That's how different the landscape was at that time. So I just wanted to fly airplanes because that's where I felt like my passion was. I didn't get into it for a career in an airline, so I felt like I was kind of spinning my wheels here. So I ended up talking to a recruiter about doing some military flying. So I went into the military. I got accepted into the Naval Aviation program. Went down to Pensacola, one of the last aviation officer candidate school. It's a school that, for you guys who like old movies, Richard Gere, it's called Officer and a Gentleman, where the Marine drill instructor is just screaming at him for 3 hours in that movie, and he becomes an aviator kind of thing. So that's the school. Probably the toughest 13, 14 weeks of my life in terms of what I had to do physically, emotionally, and mentally kind of thing. It was really a challenge, especially the water survival. One thing, and you would have thought I would have known this, but you're going in the Navy, but I wasn't a very good swimmer, right? So I ended up, and the Navy's answer is always like this. If you have a deficiency, we just make you do it over and over and over again until you figure it out, right? So just kind of a funny story where I had to jump in the pool with all the survival gear, which is about 30 pounds in Pensacola, and you're supposed to tread water and drown-proof for 30 minutes, right? So I get all that stuff on and I jump in the water, and I'm literally standing on the bottom of the pool, not being able to get up. And they send 2 safety swimmers down, kind of resuscitate you because I aspirated so much water, kind of thing. And then what they did I had 5 days to pass the test, right? So I'd get up at 5 in the morning, swim, go to lunch, swim again, and after classes, I'd go back and swim. So in a course of about 2 days, they taught you how to safely tread water for 30 minutes with a survival pack on your back. So you're wearing the boots and the whole nine. So I spent 6.5 years in the Navy. I wanted to fly airplanes. I got through the training, and unfortunately, kind of the Navy structure set up where, especially back in the 90s, it's all kind of based on the needs of the Navy. I wasn't able to physically qualify to fly airplanes because found out that I had these allergies that I wasn't aware of. And so the struggle through the NAMI, Naval Aviation Medical, was such that they essentially said, you know what, thanks but no thanks, so you're gonna have to find a different job in the Navy. So I ended up becoming a Spruance-class destroyer engineer on a destroyer, which is nothing remotely I ever wanted to do, but it was probably one of the most meaningful experiences in terms of understanding systems and understanding leadership. So I spent 2 more years in the Navy. I got out. I wanted to resume my flying career. I got a job as I ended up just getting in my ATP, spend the money to get the ATP because I already had 1,500 hours. Got a job for a little outfit out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, flying 1900s. And it was right before 9/11. And so I was flying around the UP, Wisconsin, the lower peninsula of Michigan as well. Some of the really kind of the flying that you really need as a young aviator to really kind of build up your confidence. You know, flying in a blizzard in Marquette, Michigan in February is an experience because we don't get snow here in Grand Forks like they get snow over there. It's that lake effect snow. So I spent about 4 years there. Then I got an opportunity at JetBlue. It was a little airline that just gotten started out of the East Coast. We affectionately called Jet Who at the time because nobody knew who they were. And one of the gentlemen on that picture there, so he was my student here at UND, and he was furloughed from US Airways at the time, got a job at JetBlue, and he's like, hey man, you should kind of come this way and have a look at this airline. At least you can hang out here until maybe somebody else hires if something all goes awry. And it was a very kind of a tenuous industry at the time, post 9/11, right? So I get a call, I get a job, and then I just kind of start from the ground floor as a first officer on the Embraer, which we were the launch customer for it. Allowed me a really quick upgrade. So I was in the left seat of the Embraer within 2 years. At the time, it was unheard of to be a major airline captain within 2 years. And then I think it was Karen Ruth who said, you know, have the will to say yes, right? So they asked me if I wanted to do some recruiting work for JetBlue. So one of my first event was in Phoenix at the Organization for Black Aerospace Professionals, the convention there. And so I slowly but surely started building up my JetBlue resume, so to speak. And if you do things well, and people who are kind of in charge of you, like, and what I realized is that nobody really wanted to give you permission to do things because then they're on the hook for it. So if you just willfully, ignorantly just do things outside the scope of what people think you should do, if it's successful, everybody champions you, right? And so that's where it started kind of materializing in terms of my leadership role at JetBlue, was that I was given this, a concept idea, and concept idea was trying to get UND students over to JetBlue, Embry-Riddle students to JetBlue. And so part of what I did, it was myself and an Embry-Riddle grad, we kind of sat down and kind of developed this this program called the Gateway Program, right? The structures and underpinnings were there. We developed it so it was a kind of an engagement piece more so than a recruiting piece. And it was really successful. We have now currently pilots as a captain at a major airline. We were the first of the pathway programs that exist in the industry. And so we were so proud of the partnership that we had with UND and Embry-Riddle. And then, lo and behold, it started mushrooming into other campuses: Auburn, Jacksonville University, campus in Prescott. What other school? Inter-American University down in San Juan. And so it kind of kept growing and growing. And we just had a small partnership with the Cessna 402 operator out of Hyannis. It's called Cape Air, right? So and the way we kind of looked at this, myself and my partner, was we were really looking at the value proposition in this way, that the pilot in command time was way more important to us than was jet airplane time, right? Because at the end of the day, pilots are going to come with some gaps in knowledge. Our training department will help kind of bridge those gaps with CRM, like energy management, automation and technology kind of thing. So the way I would have conversations with our Cape Air pilots is like, okay, so if you're going to descend and maintain at certain speed, certain altitude on an airplane that you're flying, you do it all manually. Now there's a button to do it. Now you just got to figure out which button does that and how you set that up so the button does that for you, right? So it was kind of those kind of conversations we were having with those Cape Air pilots. And we had it set up so everybody went to the Embraer, but then they bumped up the pay to the Embraer, and so then the senior guys were jumping over to the Embraer, so now we're having to funnel the pilots over to the 190. The thing that we did create was called a jet transition course. We spent 4 days, those pilots, they just eat, breathe, and sleep those gaps in knowledge. And so they were extremely successful. So here I go. I'm a big part of this build of this pathway program. Now, all the industry every airline has a pathway program of some sort, right? And that parlays into a role I first started out as a project pilot up in Boston in the chief pilot's office. They didn't really have a name for it. My chief pilot was calling me the half chief, because everybody was trying to figure out what my role was because I couldn't do disciplinary work. I didn't have authorizations to do everything, but I would represent the office. So I did that for about a year. And my goal was to stay up in Boston as a chief. But then there was a chief pilot position in New York that opened up. And essentially I was voluntold to go to New York. New York is our kind of flagship city, JFK specifically. So I spent about 6 years in New York managing the pilot group as an assistant chief. And then we just recently opened up Newark as a base. And the compliment that was afforded me was like we're going to start a base from the ground up, and we really need your experience to build something from the ground up. So since June, I've been part of the build in Newark, and the most interesting part for the work is that it's really operation-centric, as well as relationship-centric in terms of working with the Port Authority, corporate real estate, all these other entities that other chief pilots don't necessarily have to do day in and day out. Less personnel management kind of thing. So I'm really looking forward to kind of the next progression of my role as a chief pilot in Newark. We're supposed to open up a new terminal here before Thanksgiving, the new Terminal A. I just had a walkthrough there. It was beautiful. For those of you who have been to Terminal B, well, the new layout in LaGuardia, they were really mindful of how that terminal felt to customers. It's kind of the same thing. However, it's kind of grander in scale because it's going to have, I think, 40-some gates ultimately. And so it's on the south end of the Newark Airport. It doesn't solve the issue with Newark because that's where on time kind of goes to die, is because of that airport. So I think that's it. I really want to thank you for a chance to kind of have this discussion. Also want to keep encouraging the organizations to keep doing what you're doing to make this a better industry, make this a better campus. Thank you. I'll take questions if anybody has them.
All right, so the question I have is you talked a lot about in the beginning that you had that roommate to help you out and kind of set your eyes on the path you wanted to take and kind of readjust your focus in life, right? So with that being said, with how much of an impact that made on you, have you ever personally been that person to someone else, whether it be after already being where you want to be or even before then, sort of working your way up to that point?
So the self-actualization and the realization is that when you look back on, I think we all kind of do this, like hindsight's 20/20, right? And the thing that is a takeaway from my experience in the industry is that I've constantly had to lean on others to help me navigate to where I've been going and where I've been, kind of thing. And so it was the part of the work that I did outside of just being a chief pilot, for instance. So, well, let me back up a little bit. So having the title chief pilot or having just a title in general, the most effective thing about having a title is you can really get things done, right? If I was just a line pilot asking for something, I'd probably not get an email. But if I sent an email with my chief pilot title, I can secure an airplane for an activity, for an invitation that was afforded us from a school, for instance. So part of what JetBlue had asked me to do was, in partnership with the Organization for Black Aerospace Professionals, to create these ACE camps, ACE academies in all our focus cities. So we started really humbly in New York, where Jordan was a camper at one point. And then it kind of mushroomed. So then I started one in Boston, and then I started enlisting line pilots to help me keep going. So we have one in San Juan that we sponsor, Virgin Islands, South Florida, and Orlando as well. And then we have a JetBlue day out in the LA area. So all of those pieces is because JetBlue allowed me to use my title to create something that's in support. So, and I would say of the work that I've done in my professional realm, I would say I'm probably more proud of those kind of work because it really impacts people's lives and changes people's lives. And so, and I feel like I'm kind of an example of that. And so it would be highly hypocritical or blind of me not to kind of pay it forward, so to speak, right? And so I think that's the question you're asking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I have one more for you, if that's okay. So we've been talking today, and I've been, in and out of classes and so forth, but I've heard a lot of people talk about inclusivity and all that important stuff going on, right? Now, as important as that is, a lot of the times things end up dissolving to sort of a quite literally black and white. And as someone myself who's mixed, quite literally half black and white, sometimes it seems like you're in a bit of a gray zone. Is there any tips you might have on trying to navigate that?
Yeah, I think Brian Gambino said it earlier, right? Anytime you have these conversations, it has to be from a position of empathy, right? And I think he used the word tolerance. Tolerance is rooted in empathy. So when people present what may feel like a kind of a contentious topic or a subject, I think what we have to do now is kind of step back and kind of try to meet them where they're at, or at least halfway from where they're at instead of being overly combative. I'll give you a good example. So after the George Floyd, there was a lot of conversations within and outside of the cockpit. Fortunately, we weren't flying very much, so there wasn't a whole lot of flights going out. So one of the things that we did at JetBlue was in Terminal 5, we put the Black Lives Matter banner front and center. As customers came down, the banner was there. One of my pilots came in and I was really grateful that he actually came in and engaged me in a conversation. So he comes in and says, "Hey, Eric, so was that your decision to put that banner out there?" I said, "I don't have that kind of power. Didn't make that decision." He goes, "Well, I really think it's going to impact our customers." And I said, "Well, how so?" Right? Just kind of challenging him. And he said, "Well, the organization is a Marxist, socialist organization, and I can't believe we're willing to align ourselves with BLM." I said, "Well, the reality is that is not a support of an organization. That was what it's called JADE, and I think I had a picture of it up there. But JADE was the JetBlue African Diaspora Experience, right? Collectively, those members of JADE asked our senior leadership in solidarity to against police brutality, and they asked if they could put that banner up. JetBlue said, absolutely. Because, and this is what I said to him, because we're a company that can champion and applaud law enforcement because we have an NYPD airplane painted in NYPD letters and colors, and we can also be against police brutality. I said, I think you're kind of overthinking this in a way that it shouldn't be. And I said, the thing that I hope you're aware is, historically speaking, most of the black liberation movements in this country has always been maligned as such, as Marxist. King was deemed a Marxist. Frederick Douglass was a communist. Go back and forth. And that allows you to critique it on a political realm when that sign is not political and it's not why that's there, right? And he goes, well, how am I to know the difference? I said, because I told you now, right? Because the conversation is important. And he's like, I don't know. I think it's for a general public who's flying, they're not going to be able to differentiate themselves, that sign, from the organization. I said, no, I think people are smarter than that, and I'm hoping that people will do a little more research. And I was hopeful after that conversation that he walked away with a measure of understanding as to what that sign meant for JetBlue, right? And so I think that's one of the wonderful things about me in that role is the invitation for a conversation with our pilots in a way. And I've always been presented myself as kind of a pilot advocate in a chief pilot role, right? And this is kind of the ethos of JetBlue chief pilots, is that we're a values-based airline, and if I make all my decisions through that prism of that values, I'm always making the right decision, kind of thing. And so I welcome those conversations. I've had some really interesting conversations aside from that as well. But having said that, if a pilot's willing to come into my office and willing to have an open discussion, I certainly welcome that. That was a long answer. Anybody else? All right, thank you, everyone.